plant-based meat and seafood alternatives, right. Everyone's trying them, seems like. And there's this whole buzz about plant-based diets being super healthy.
Yeah, and in general, that's true. But today, we're really diving deep into this recent study that takes a close look at, the actual nutritional facts of these alternatives. How do they actually compare to the real thing? That's what this study wanted to find out.
And it was interesting, to say the least. One of the things that kind of jumped out at me right away was the sodium. Like, some of these alternatives had way more sodium than, honestly, than I expected.
Yeah, that's actually pretty common when you're talking about these kinds of processed foods.
Mm.
To really nail that, like meaty flavor and texture, manufacturers often, well, they rely on sodium.
So it's a trade-off then. Like, okay, less meat, maybe, but potentially a lot more salt. What does that mean for someone who is, keeping an eye on their sodium intake?
Well, it really means you got to read those nutrition labels,
Mm.
like really scrutinize them. High sodium has been linked to, high blood pressure, and that's a risk factor for heart disease. So yeah, definitely something to be mindful of, especially if these alternatives are like a regular part of your diet.
Makes total sense. It's easy to kind of get, I don't know, caught up in the plant-based of it all and just assume it's a free pass, health-wise. But this study, I think it really highlights how that's not always the case.
Exactly, exactly. And it goes beyond just sodium, too. The study also found that a lot of these plant-based options, they were actually kind of lacking in some key vitamins and minerals as well.
Really? Like, what were we missing?
Well, for one, beef. Beef consistently had more iron and vitamin B12 compared to, the plant-based alternatives they looked at in the study.
Okay. And for those of us who don't have, like, nutrition degrees, why is that a big deal? Break it down for us.
Okay, so even if you're just a little iron deficient, it can really make you feel
Yeah.
like tired, sluggish, just blah.
Yeah.
And B12, that's absolutely essential for your nerve function. We're talking about brain power here. So yeah, if you're going all in on plant-based alternatives and completely ditching animal products, you might actually be missing out on some really important nutrients.
See, that's what I wouldn't have expected. I kind of always just had it in my head. Plant-based equals healthier. It's definitely more nuanced than just meat versus no meat.
Absolutely. And speaking of nuances, when you start looking at seafood alternatives, omega-3 fatty acids, those are a big part of the conversation.
Right. Those are the heart-healthy fats that we hear so much about.
Exactly. And while some plant-based alternatives might add things like algae to up their omega-3 content, they often don't have the same levels of those specific types of omega-3s, EPA and DHA, that are naturally found in fatty fish, like salmon or tuna.
So it's not just as simple as, like, looking for omega-3s on the label and calling it good.
Not quite. You really have to, be a little more discerning. Those long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA, they're linked to a bunch of health benefits, everything from heart health to brain health.
So what you're saying is just because a product says it has omega-3s doesn't mean it has the good stuff.
Well, it might, but you have to do a little detective work. Check the ingredient list and see if they specify EPA and DHA.
Yeah.
If not, and those omega-3s are coming solely from plant sources, you might not be getting the full benefits.
Okay, so ingredient lists are key. It sounds like this study really dug deep into those. What did they find? Were there any surprises there?
They did. They actually analyzed the ingredient list of a huge range of plant-based meat and seafood alternatives. And one thing that stood out was the variation in sodium content.
You mentioned that earlier. Some of these products were really high in sodium.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, there were some products that were fortified with vitamins and minerals to make up for some of those naturally occurring nutrients found in animal products.
Fortification, that's where things get really interesting for me. It's like giving these plant-based alternatives a nutritional boost. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about it like this. We already fortify a lot of common foods to improve their nutritional value, like iodized salt, for example.
Right. We add iodine to salt because it's essential for thyroid function, and many people don't get enough through their diet alone.
Exactly. And it's been incredibly successful in reducing the incidence of iodine deficiency disorders. Another example is folic acid fortification in cereals and grains, which has been instrumental in preventing birth defects.
So we already have these great examples of fortification working to improve public health. Could we apply those same principles to plant-based meat and seafood?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's already happening to some extent. You'll find plant-based milk alternatives fortified with calcium and vitamin D, for example, to make them more comparable to cow's milk.
That makes a lot of sense. I usually go for fortified plant-based milk for that reason. So what's stopping us from doing the same thing with plant-based meat and seafood on a larger scale?
Well, there are some challenges. fortification can be tricky. You have to make sure the added nutrients are stable in the product, that they're absorbed by the body, and that they don't affect the taste or texture of the food in an unappealing way.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a delicate balancing act. You want the food to taste good too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But despite the challenges, I think fortification has enormous potential in the world of plant-based alternatives. If we can get it right, we could create products that are not only delicious and sustainable, but also incredibly nutrient-dense.
That's a really exciting thought. So instead of just trying to mimic the experience of eating meat or seafood, we could actually replicate the nutritional benefits or even surpass them.
Exactly. Imagine a future where plant-based meat and seafood are considered just as nutritious, if not more so, than their animal-derived counterparts. That's the dream.
Okay, that's a future I can get behind. But how do we get there? What needs to happen to make this dream a reality?
Well, for starters, we need more research. This study was a great first step, but we need more data on the nutritional content of these alternatives. And we need to figure out the most effective ways to fortify them without compromising taste or texture.
Right, because what's the point of a super nutritious veggie burger if no one wants to eat it?
Exactly. We also need buy-in from manufacturers. They need to be willing to invest in fortification and make it a priority. And of course, we need consumers to understand the importance of reading labels and choosing products that are both delicious and nutritious.
It's a team effort. Researchers, manufacturers, and consumers all working together to create a future where plant-based alternatives are a truly healthy and sustainable option. I love it.
Me too. It's an exciting time to be in the world of food and nutrition. Who knows what the future holds?
Well, on that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about what this all means for consumers and what you should be looking for the next time you're browsing the grocery store aisles. All right, and we're back. So before the break, we were talking all about, the potential of these fortified plant-based meat and seafood options. But let's be real for a sec. When you're actually in the grocery store staring at all those shelves, it can be a lot.
Oh, it's totally overwhelming. There are just so many options.
It is. So for those of us who aren't, nutrition experts, what should we actually be looking for? What are the red flags? What are the green lights to help us make healthier choices?
Okay, so first and foremost, I think it's really important to remember, we talked about this a bit, but plant-based on the label doesn't necessarily mean it's a health food.
Right. You definitely learned that today.
For sure. So step one, like always, flip that package over, check out the nutrition label, pay attention to serving size first, because sometimes they're a lot smaller than you might think.
Right.
And then, yeah, sodium content, definitely. Try to go for products that are lower in sodium, especially if, like we were saying, you're trying to watch your blood pressure.
Okay, sodium. Got it. What else should we be zeroing in on that label?
So if you're looking for those good omega-3s, those long-chain ones we talked about, the EPA and DHA, you got to scan the ingredient list. If they're not actually listed out, the product might still have some omega-3s from plant sources, but you might not be getting all those same benefits, those unique benefits that are associated with EPA and DHA.
You really have to be like an ingredient detective.
Exactly, exactly. The more you know, the better choices you can make, right? And speaking of ingredients to look for, keep an eye out for products that are fortified with those essential vitamins and minerals we were talking about. So, iron, vitamin B12, maybe even some calcium and vitamin D. It all kind of depends on what you're going for.
So it really is about being like label detectives. Check that sodium, really look at the ingredients, and then see if they've added in those extra vitamins and minerals.
Totally. And this is important. Don't be afraid to try new things.
Yeah.
The world of plant-based meat and seafood alternatives, it's changing all the time. There are constantly new products coming out. So what might have been true a year ago, maybe is not the case today.
Oh, that's a great point. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. Don't be afraid to revisit products that maybe you've tried in the past. For anyone listening who's thinking about okay, I want to eat more plant-based, maybe incorporate some more of these alternatives into my diet, what's the bottom line for them?
I say go for it. These alternatives, they can be a really delicious, a more sustainable way to enjoy some of your favorite foods. Just remember, not all of them are created equal. A little label literacy, it goes a long way.
So important. Honestly, they should teach label literacy in school. Well, that is all the time we have for today, but for those of you listening, we want to hear from you. Do you think plant-based alternatives can be just as nutritious or even more nutritious than meat and seafood? Head on over to our social media, let us know what you think. Until next time, happy and healthy eating.